I'm Logan Crawford, and right now on Spotlight, we have the honor of hosting the author behind the deeply moving and spiritually uplifting book. It is called In God's Time, and it is written by Betty B. Hilton, with a narrative centered on young love, heartbreak, and the profound choices we make. Betty's novel underscores the undeniable influence of divine intervention in our lives. It's a testament to faith, surrender, and the transformative power of God's love. We're delighted to have this very talented author join us here today on Spotlight. We thank our team at Atticus Publishing for helping us put her in the spotlight today. And we ask viewers at home to support writers like her by subscribing to our channel and by purchasing this wonderful book. The links are below. Betty, so good to see you here today on Spotlight.
Thank you so much for having me.
My pleasure. Let's give the folks at home the big picture. Let's give them an overview of what In God's Time is about.
I met my baby's father when I was 14. We met in a grocery store. His mother introduced us, and I fell in love at first sight, and he did too. And we dated, and when I was in late 15, when I was 15, we got pregnant. We had a baby, and it was a boy. I wasn't supposed to know what it was, but paperwork in hospitals don't always do the right thing.
Right.
But I found out. Anyway, we decided that we weren't old enough to feed ourselves, much less take care of a child. So we decided to give the baby up for adoption. Roger went in the Navy because he'd already graduated from high school, and I went back to high school. And later, I met my husband, my first husband, the father of my other two children, Lori and Cleo, and his name was Carl Bars. My husband's name was, and he was a wonderful man, a wonderful father. We had a really good marriage. Unfortunately, Carl died when he was 48 years old. He had a heart attack and dropped dead. And my life was in turmoil. I had my daughter and my grandson living with me. And I just said, you know, I've got to find me a church again and get back into the church. And I was invited to the Nazarene Church in Charleston, South Carolina. And I went, and I fell in love with the church, with the people in the church, but I fell in love with my God. And I just turned my life over to him. And I taught children's church. I did everything that needed to be done when they needed something to be done in the church, whether it was cooking or cleaning or whatever. That's what I did. And it was wonderful. And then Roger contacted me in 2009 and asked me if I would like for us to look for Scott again, because I had looked back in 1989. And my mother didn't tell me he had come to her front door in 1986 and in 89. And the only thing she could tell me was he said, "I'm Scott and I'm Anderson." And so I looked for Scott Anderson. Roger looked for Scott Anderson. We found nothing. After that, we had Hugo. All the books and everything in Charleston were moved. You couldn't get to any of the paperwork. We had Hurricane Hugo, and it was horrific. But anyway, I just kind of put that aside with my paperwork, and I told the Lord, when you're ready, I'm ready. So I had all this paperwork, and I had joined these people, investigative companies, and I even hired a private detective. Nobody could find anything. So we had search angels. When Roger contacted me, we found some search angels. And every time they gave us a name that they thought was Scott Anderson, the deal was they would give me the name, Roger would call him, because I was not going to call some man and his wife wonder who this woman is.
Yeah.
So Roger called him. And we made no progress whatsoever. Okay, Roger came to Charleston. He lived in Maine. He came to Charleston in January of 2010. We searched every high school, every place we thought he might be. You know, we went to schools and said, our child was an alumni, and so they let us in and let us look because we didn't know where he was. Well, we had put all this information out on the internet, on reunion sites. Scott's, Jeremy's adopted mother, the name in the book is Jeremy. It's not my son's name. I changed the name to keep his privacy private. Anyway, his adopted mother watched The Locator on HBO. She went to the computer, typed in his name, and all of our records came up. She sent me an email and she said, "Your search is over. I have your son." And I mean, I was blown away. Roger was at his hotel and I told him, I said, I called him. I couldn't get him on the phone. My daughter was at my house and she said, "Mom, sit down. You're going to have a heart attack or a stroke. I'll take care of this." So she called the hotel and got in touch with him. And I told him, I said, "You have to come over here and look at this email I have." He said, "Now?" I said, "Right now." It was 2:00 in the morning. But anyway, he came. We cried. We were elated. We told her that and asked her to please call us the next day. The next day, I got a telephone call after we had seen some attorneys that they didn't have the information we needed, but I got a telephone call. We were in Krispy Kreme in Charleston, South Carolina, and this young man asked for me and told me who he was. And I told him, "I know who you are, son. Please hold on while we go outside so we can talk to you on the speaker on my phone." And he said, "Yes, ma'am." And we went outside and we talked to him for an hour and a half. Wow. It was just so emotional. We cried, we laughed. We told him, he had been told we were college students and just didn't want a baby. I told him, I said, "That's not true. We were babies having a baby, and we did what was best for you, but the best thing that we knew to do for you." So but what I found out was when the person that went to my mother's house was not him. He never went there. God sent an angel to my mother so she would have peace. She was in the early stages of Alzheimer's, not whenever she told me, but at this point in time. And she died in 1991. But I think what the angel said to her was not, "I'm Scott Anderson," that I'm Scott and I'm her son. So, and we met this young man when he was 42 years old. I was 58 because I had him when I was 16. And it was the most amazing thing ever. It was just absolutely, God's fingerprints are all over this story. He looks just like me and his daddy. He's got my eyes and my dimples. He's got his daddy's nose and chin. He's just wonderful. And he walks in our back door now, gets him a Coke out of the refrigerator, comes in and sits down and says, "So what are y'all doing?" I mean, he is such a blessing to us. And we love him. Our youngest granddaughter is named Sophie. He liked that name. That was his grandmother's name, Roger's mother's name. So God did things that nobody else could ever do. I mean, when you give your life to God, he moves mountains. And I am a firm believer in that. And when I sell my books at book signings, I give people a bookmark with my email address on it and a business card with my telephone number. And I say, if you need any help searching, call me. If you know somebody that's in trouble and don't know what to do, call me. I will be glad to help anybody I can because God has been so wonderful to me.
It's just an absolutely amazing, beautiful, mind-blowing story that you tell. Your book is basically your true life story, but the names have been changed to protect the identities and privacy of certain people. And it's hard. The strangest things, stories in life are true stories, right? And
Yes.
so it's a wonderful, wonderful, faith affirming story, that's for sure. And God's blessing that, Scott is back in your life after 42 years. Was the first time you saw him, he was 42 years old?
First time I got to touch him, kiss him, hug him, it was just absolutely amazing. And he was his daddy's best man when we got married.
Wow.
And we got married, and all of my son gave me away, and my daughter was my matron of honor, and we had all the grandchildren in the wedding. I made dresses for all the girls and tuxedo vest and ties for the boys. It was just a blessing to behold.
Yeah. And everything came completely full circle, which is amazing in your personal life, marriage, your son.
Yes.
It's sort of like everything fit together at that time. So,
and my daughter comes here at Christmas time, and Scott's here when we have Christmas, and we just have a good time. My son lives in Florida. He doesn't get here very often, but my other son, his name is Cleo. My daughter's name is Lori. They were my blessings from God very early on, because I was very depressed after I gave Scott up. And it's such a hard thing to do. But I kept telling myself, God knows what he's doing. And I kept telling myself, and I told the Lord all the time, when you're ready, I'm ready. And if it's not till I get to heaven to meet him, that's okay. Right. Just as long as I get to meet him and see the man that he's become. And he just gave me things far beyond what I ever expected. And my husband and I are the happiest people in the world.
Wonderful, wonderful. And also hence the title, In God's Time. You
Right.
didn't know when everything would come together. It came together when he was 42 years old, and you said you were 58 years old or something?
Yes, I was.
Amazing.
I had been a widow for 12 years, but whenever Scott was, whenever we were looking for him, we had no idea, where he lived or anything. And after we met him and we got married, he came to Maine, him and his family, for vacation with us. And the next year he asked Roger, he said, when are you going to retire? And Roger said, next year sometime. He said, well, would you move to Tennessee so you can be close to us and your granddaughters? And Roger said, we'll come down next week and buy a house. Wow. And we did. And then he leased it for us until the next year when Roger retired.
Amazing. Amazing. Yep. It's a true love story. And it's wonderful. And it's great of you that you carried him for 9 months and gave birth to him, and then gave him away, as heartbreaking as it was, because it was the best thing for him. And that is an act of love as well. And that love came back to you 42 years later, and it's still in your life now. It's a beautiful story. It is called In God's Time. It is a story, a true story, that will have you, like I was, as Betty told it, your jaw dropping throughout, because it is just amazing. One last question I have for you, Betty, before we go today. How much time transpired from the time that your mother got the message from an angel, it seems, to the time you actually found Scott?
The last time the angel was at my mother's was in 1989. And we found Scott in 2010, January of 2010. Wow.
So that was many, many, many years later.
When I was getting ready to move, to marry Roger and move, I opened the drawer that I had all my paperwork in, and I had numbers that linked to names. And I opened the book, and the first number I had, when I turned the page, it was the name and address of his parents. I'd had it all that time, but God wasn't ready. You copied it out. I had copied. I went to the courthouse and copied names and addresses of people that had adopted children through the attorney that I used, and I had all of that information all those years, but I didn't know I had it.
Yeah, exactly.
But God wasn't ready.
Right, it had to be on His time. And hence
That's
the
right.
name of the book, In God's
Absolutely.
Time. It's a wonderful book. It's highly recommended. The links are below this interview. Betty, thank you so much for joining us here today on Spotlight.
Thank you for having me.
My pleasure, and I'm so happy your story has a happy ending. And to the folks at home, I'm Logan Crawford, thanking you for your time this time. Until next time on Spotlight.